We're now on to our grand finale. My dear gentlemen, and the ladies, get up for our keynote speaker, Jay Dutta. Jay, the Nick Fury of UX of Deutsche Bank, orchestrates user experience design globally to enhance DB's diverse investment banking products and platforms. With over 25 years' experience, Jay has assembled and led Avenger-level design teams across, across projects, across enterprise, consumer, and consumer domains, delivering time-critical multi-million-dollar projects. Jay has spearheaded projects like Bangalore Airport Identity and Wayfinding and the Arogya Setu app. He is the founder of DesignUp Conference, one of the most influential design in tech conferences globally. Passionate about rethinking systems and relationships through design, let's hear more from Jay himself on Design for Happy. Over to you, Jay.
That's okay. Thank you so much. I think, like Shanti was saying, I'm feeling a little bit of a misfit, a man in a not a real estate world. But it's lovely to hear so many interesting conversations. The good part is, at one point of time in my life, and I come from Ahmedabad, and I used to live not far from Sangat, the architectural practice of B.V. Doshi. I wanted to be an architect. Accidentally ended up being a type designer, typographer, and eventually a UX designer, partly because typography's nature is very technical and artistic both. So with that, let me share some snippets of my world and see what does happy mean in possibly spaces or places. Thank you. So yeah, I love the presentation just before, and ma'am, I think what you talked about, I think joy keeps coming in sparks and going in sparks, and that's the beauty of it. Unless, of course, you become into the state of nirvana, where you are in a constant state of joy, maybe, that's a different story. But I guess we are all in several light years away from that for the moment, here at least. So I'll talk about sparking moments of joy, not necessarily forever joy per se. The fundamental question that I began with, I come from the world of user experience, is that are there principles, are there learnings, are there things that I have stumbled upon and accidentally kind of broken things and learned, help spark joy beyond screens? And by the way, for those of you who, I'm sure you know, all of you know what UX is, but let me just kind of my point of view. It is about, I think for centuries we know how a door works and how a window works and how things in the physical world work, a glass and all of that. Over the last 4 or 5 or 6 decades, when computers came in and became more and more mainstream, we didn't know how to negotiate with this thing which kept appearing and disappearing, and you close it and it disappears and stuff like that. I think that was the start of human-computer interfaces. That was, and still is very much. From that came interaction design. We dropped the word human-computer and we just said interaction. Then came the word user experience. Actually, user experience is a fairly old word. But in recent circulation, now it's the world of product design. Of course, product designers, in the sense of people who used to design physical spaces, are pretty angry because they said, hey, these digital guys are taking over our world. But we have been always forever stealing lots of different things. Like, for example, we had information architecture, so we stole from your line of things. We had usability analysts, we stole from accountants, just to make it sound all very legit and good. So anyway, let's look at how and the what. So I have 4 stories for you, and I think if at any point of time we are going too slow, Abha, please tell me to speed up and we'll go fast. And 4 learnings, things that I have accidentally stumbled upon or wish I had known before, and hopefully some of this helps. These are not solutions. I don't know your world good enough to offer you solutions, but these are just learnings that I've had. So a little backstory. I'm almost there. I've been around for a longer time. I kind of was calculating sitting here, and I think it's going to be 30 years very soon that I've been in the profession. Still seems like the other day that I walked out from the National Institute of Design when there were no VCs, no UX design, no Google, no app. Actually, Apple was still there. Apple and Adobe were some of the first forerunners in our world, and we just had the laser printer 2, which is a PDF and all of that. And as a type designer, this was like, wow, this is amazing. So if I look at my work overall, there are kind of 4 large phases overall. One is the world of branding, which is from typography to branding, which I entered. I've had a lot of once-in-a-lifetime projects, though this moment also is a once-in-a-lifetime. Me standing here, you sitting there, we are all having this conversation and so on. But anyway, I think seeing my identity, which was not my favorite identity, by the way, 50th year of India's independence, 3 prime ministers, 2 of them ex, standing there was always a special moment. Of course, I worked with spaces, people like Philip Stark, and he's done this beautiful restaurant in Mauritius. So a lot of this L'Eau Rock and L'Eau Saint-Geron and a bunch of these things. And of course, moving on to the early world of interaction design, UX design, information architecture, whatever we called them back then. Going on to what my very first boss invited me, and she said, come over, you got to do an airport. So I'll tell you more about that. And of course, the world of UX, I led and grew the practice for Adobe here in India, and then went on to do MakeMyTrip, which was like an interesting project, and interesting in an interesting word. And of course, something which you might have loved and hated in equal measure, Arogya Setu, which many of you, for different reasons, would have carried on in your pocket. It was a crazy one. And the one which I've been working the longest, never getting paid for, but I love the most, is DesignUp, a personal side project pretty much. It's been there since 2016, and again, some lessons from there as well. And like what WiREnet does, a lot of other work in research and mentoring, so stuff like that we do. The fundamental thing is we try to sort of make sure, how do you sort of demystify design in the world of technology? Because design is what makes tech edible. Tech is very sharp edges. You can't eat it really unless you have a layer and a veneer of design per se. So let's start in the very beginning, back to the future. And the question for all of you in the audience is, how old do you think this kitchen is? Any guesses? Sorry? 30? Any other guesses? 40? Okay, you're halfway there. This is 101 years old. So this is, by the way, this is an early experiment with Bauhaus, and for all the architects, I'm sure all of you know what Bauhaus is. It had a huge influence on my design education per se. And interestingly, I learned much later that this kitchen is what UX design owes its early sort of roots to. Because this is the phase in life when men and women are both working. They have moved, the roots have moved, they're working together, they're cooking together. They had kitchens, and someone wanted to redesign the kitchen and rethink the kitchen. And the kitchen is, if you think, very much like UX design. You have an output and an outcome which is there, but the pathways are different. We talk about flows in UX design. This actually, I remember seeing in V&A, the designs which were drawn up for this, how the pathways might be. You're cooking, cleaning, cutting, chopping, getting it together, and the food comes. The outcome is the food, but there is a process. It's almost like buying a ticket is your outcome, or ordering flowers is your outcome, but there's a process in the middle. So I think this is where it was, and this is Bauhaus, I think, started by an architect, Walter Gropius. shut down by the Nazis. Of course, a whole bunch of them moved, and I think for those of you in architecture, there's this whole relation with Chicago and the new sort of Bauhaus, and so I'll not go into detail, but they influenced everything from, of course, architecture, but more in terms of typography, type design, people kind of radically sort of going off into other areas, photography and how what we see in terms of the mix of photo and typography together. This is 1926, something called the Frankfurt Kitchen. So essentially things started moving after that, and people started thinking, hey, this makes sense. I mean, how can we modularize it? And this is another kind of thing which is, of course, it's easy to kind of say that co-working with people that you love is, of course, a recipe for joy, for happiness, for I think this is, again, in workspaces as well. So let me shift another many years ahead into a place called 3 Mile Island. Anyone has any idea what this is, one notorious incident this is related to? Any thoughts? Okay, so nuclear accident, a disaster which is probably one of the worst civilian nuclear disasters in the US history. Thankfully, the fallout wasn't that large that the East Coast was wiped out, but it could have been. And this is, again, people looking at it. So this is the space in which these people worked. I mean, they all co-working, not necessarily with in a happy place with a happy set of people. You can see a whole set of buttons and dials. And Don Norman, who was a young guy starting in cognitive sciences, was one of the people sent to do an audit and see what went wrong. And he said, hey, there are 14 buttons in red, and all 14 mean 14 different things, and some 16 in green, which also means 16 different things. So you actually need a user manual to make sure what is happening. In the event of a nuclear meltdown, can you imagine the atmosphere in the room where people are scrambling to figure out what this meant and what this meant in that condition? So it was absolutely unintuitive, and that's what he talks about, that we usually blame it on human beings. Human error is a very common term, but I think there is a whole lot of lack of thinking which leads to this kind of situations. Don Norman, of course, went on to write the design of everyday things and a whole bunch of other books, and this is, again, one of those things where a cognitive overload is, of course, not a recipe for a very happy scenario, or not for sparking joy for sure. Unless, of course, you have a good room with a view, and the room with a view is changing, then it's probably not that bad, and you see sunrises and sunsets in Sydney and Tokyo and Delhi, and without the smog, hopefully. So I think this is a reminder to all of ourselves, and where we talk about the cost of good design and bad design, and why is good design so expensive? Because the cost of bad design can be way more expensive, and I think this is one of those things. So 1988, after a lot of deliberation, of course, the word user experience is coined, but if you think about it, everything is user experience. I mean, getting into this, getting out of here, kind of being in the auditorium, driving a car, everything is a user experience. So it should not ideally be limited just to screens. And that's what probably the submission is. Of course, we had a chance we hosted Don recently in Bangalore. He's 88, still jumping around. And his secret to being fit is to choose parents very wisely, which I'm not sure how many of you have done so. But yeah, that's a good idea kind of to do. So, but here's the first thing, which is very often we design things and we think so much of materials and so much of textures and so much of typography, and we go into details, and people like us will go into so much details, but often we forget the context of use. This is what the nuclear disaster was talking about, which the kitchen was not talking about. The kitchen was a perfect study in understanding context in which couples work, and how do we work together. So, second story, an airport of our own. So I was happily working away in UK, in lots of different places in Europe and South Africa and all that for many years, until my very first boss, and this is beyond Y2K, and I was just talking about how long I've been in UX. I think 2019 is when I started, when it was such an amazing thing to see you getting a text message because money has been created into your bank account. Now you just hate text messages, they're all over. Everything is a text message, and you said, my God, this is too much. If you look at it, the phones looked very weird then. There was no Apple yet. They would be invented much later. There was something called Palm, which was like a calendar and everything, and then you had Blackberries. How many of you used Blackberries? Wow, lots of people, which dates you, by the way. So this is early days of UX, and then I was enjoying my ride in the world of user experience, and then my very first boss, Sujata Keshavan Guha, calls me and says, have you done airports? And I'm like, what is doing an airport? I have no idea. I'm not an architect. I'm not a planner of any sort. What am I supposed to do with an airport? And she said, well, we got to find an identity for an airport, and this has got to be a once-in-a-lifetime project. This is one of my many once-in-a-lifetime projects. Arogya Setu also was promised the same thing. This is a once-in-a-lifetime project. So there are many once-in-a-lifetime projects. And I had, actually, the idea seemed very interesting. And of course, 2008 recession was looming. And I was running my own studio in Manchester, very close, right between the Man United football stadium and the Manchester, the Old Trafford cricket ground. Actually, they are walkable distances, and we are right in the middle. And every time a football match happened, you had to close office because who knows what might happen. I mean, there are fish and chip shops everywhere. So it was a little crazy. Anyway, so she said, have you done an airport? And I said, of course not. And I'm like, what is doing an airport? And she said, we got to find an identity. So we had a lot of debates upon what the identity of the airport should be. A Zurich consortium was leading this. They wanted something very clean. It should have no political angles to it, no names of historical figures, and so on and so forth. It should be just called the Bangalore Airport or the Bengaluru Airport. And the 3 or 4 things which was kind of talked about was, of course, the IT possibility. Let's talk about Bangalore as the IT city, and can we do an identity around IT? The second one was biotech, which was also then kind of doing very well, so can we have biotech? The third thing was heritage and history without being too sort of, maybe more arts, culture, heritage, that was the other one. And the third thing was sort of nature. And for me, nature was like, of course, Bangalore was known more for its gardens, but coming back from the UK, whenever I used to get up in the morning and take my car to work, I would see these flowers all over my windshield. And this was like such a beautiful moment. And I kept pushing for it. And they were saying, no, but there are these other 3 ideas also. They're equally good. And to be honest with you, we had some brilliant ideas all over. So I made this logo, and I was just still stuck on the number 2 and number 3 when a very young and quiet intern, she comes up to me and says, I want to speak with you, and do you know, when you're coming down, and remember this is the old airport in Bangalore, when you're flying down, do you remember seeing all those houses? I'm like, yeah, what about them? Like the colors? And boom, it struck me. She said, this is the land of the Kanjivarams and those brightly colored houses, and you're still making a very European palette out there. 16 years of being in Europe kind of makes you kind of very subtle and grays and kind of, and those colors are hers. She chose those colors. I said, you got to take over from here, and you choose the colors. And I was kind of, first I did those reds, and I said, it doesn't work. And I think every time I see those people wearing those teal thing, I remember those conversations over there. Of course, to sell my idea and to sell, even though I was the creative director at that point of time, it was still a very, very democratic process in which we kind of share ideas and show it. And of course, I was trying to sell this. And everyone saw in this a hummingbird. I'm not sure that's what you see, but of course, I won't see that. By the way, if you see in the background, there's all construction work going on. We had the chance to go on all the runways. I've been to the runways of Hyderabad, Delhi, Bangalore, and Bombay. So I think we did a lot of other work with other airports also, but Bangalore remains very special. So I think we had the chance to go up on all the ATC towers, go on the runways, be in those. Actually, when they were doing the drills with those fire trucks, you'll see those are like huge fire trucks. So I think those are the special moments. This is still work in the background in progress. For me, I think this was a personal favorite. The smallest little thing on the side of the trolleys. This is those fire trucks, and those are huge. I mean, it can take some 8 to 10 people in there. And I was not part of T2 at all. But I think the beauty of it is that this idea, this notion endured, and it's gone to the next there. So I think here's the second sort of thing, which is joy comes from having the pride of place and the place of pride. You can play around it in both ways. You're like, this is my airport. This is, every time I come back, this is my airport. Or this airport means something to me. This city means something to me. So I heard this, and this probably resonates the best. I think success is when your idea is no longer your own, but everyone owns that idea. I mean, it's like, the ownership has got transferred. Everyone owns it, and that's the beauty of it. And I think this is something that Bangalore Airport taught me overall. The third story, and how are we doing for time? Are we okay? Yeah, sure. Okay, so this one was a tricky one. So I don't know how many of you remember what MakeMyTrip used to be. It was one very colorful, gaudily colorful app. And it was crazy, and every time you opened it, there was discount, buy two, get one kind of thing, or get 20%, 30% here, 10%. It was just discounts and bright colors everywhere kind of thing. And so I used to work in the VC world, and the VCs wanted me to work with them, and I was like, no way am I going to work. This is the world's, I mean, not world's, I would say India's worst design app ever, and so many millions of people use that. But then the more I thought about it, the more you realize that India is very cost conscious. So even if people give you 10 rupees off or 20 rupees off, you ignore bad design and say, okay, they're giving me 20 rupees off, so big deal kind of thing. So I think loyalty is kind of very fickle. So anyway, this is what it used to look like. I mean, sometimes actually you could not even log in to cancel your bookings. I'm not sure whether you remember that experience. So then they would tell you, forget it. Go to the Indigo or whatever kind of Jet Airways used to be there. Go to Jet Airways and you can just cancel it at their end, not at MakeMyTrip. You can't even log in. So this is what it used to be, very colorful, very bright, and very blue, and all of that. So I went to Deep Kalra, who's obviously very, very design savvy, but he's also extremely business savvy. So in this case, the business savvy part of him took over in the MakeMyTrip. I'm sure if he was getting you to do a house for him, would be very personal and will be all the fine design choices there. So I had to rephrase it. He's the big boss and the founder. I had to rephrase it, and I said, you know what? There is no my in MakeMyTrip. And he said, what do you mean? I said, you know what? I mean, this is the age of personalization and hyper-personalization. And forget Amazon. Even before Amazon, there is the saying used to go that Tesco can tell a lady whether she's pregnant or not basis the choices she makes in what she's buying. This is data science, that is pattern making. Today we call it AI and put a big sort of nice stamp, but data sciences have always been there in some way, form or other, and Amazon made it even better. And why are we stuck in this world? Why are we sort of doing like the same old thing and just sort of giving people 10% discount and 20% discount coupons? So he thought about it, so I thought either he'll throw me out, or thankfully he couldn't throw me out then because I was working with a VC. So either he will ask me not to come from next day, or he will say, fine, I mean, we'll kind of do something. And he said, that makes sense. Tell me, what can you do? So we went back to doing what 101 years ago people in Bauhaus did, which was to map flows. How do you map flows? Which is how do people come in, go out, do all those kinds of things? And there's a lot of kind of complex maps that we started looking at. And we saw patterns emerging out of it that you could do so much more overall because something emerged which was very interesting. I'll come back to that in a moment. So we did what we wanted to do, deep personalization. Of course, there were technical challenges and all sorts of things, which is because you are kind of catering to about 10 million people logging in every day and going through things, and You cannot break the system because suddenly they will, then I think, then people will get mad because they're not able to buy a ticket or book a holiday home or whatever thing, right? So we put this together, and that's what it earlier used to look like, and that's what the first version of it looked like. That's what the third version of that looks like. I think what you see today is about the fifth version of it, but it's not fundamentally changed quite a lot. Of course, what has changed is, what has happened here is deeper suggestions. If you have bought a flight but not bought a hotel, for example, and you're going from Bangalore to Bombay, it might offer you hotel suggestions. And this is very logical if you think about it. There is always unsold inventory which can be given at a discount. But if you say there's a discount versus if you say, I understand you, you're going to somewhere and you might not have booked, it's a different thing as opposed to saying a blanket discount. This is how an old hotel page, booking page used to look like versus what I think it looks like today. It's probably got different, slightly different now. What that old page used to look like, of course, there's a plethora of information, but what you also realize is that we don't want to withhold information. We rather have you see information and act upon it as opposed to like not tell you much overall. So the learning here is, which is the same and which is probably a harder one, I guess, for folks doing offices and large complexes, is that we typically tend to design for a mass, a million. And I think in Flipkart, you have the big billion days, and you talk about billions, right? I think, can you design for one? Can you build around one, build for one? That's the thinking. Because eventually, I mean, that one unifies into cohorts of different sorts. I mean, people who might have disability, not necessarily permanent disability, but temporary disability. People sort of break hands, people who have permanent disability, people who are looking for something different, people who might not like light. We assume that everyone likes bright and light and all of that, but people with eye issues might not like it. So there can be many people, many individuals who can come together in cohorts. There is also mind spaces which are different. So the same person who's going on a business trip has a very transactional approach to travel versus the same person going with family has a very different approach to travel. So this is where the person is kind of looking at, let's say. So, but I think the overall, whether it's my trip, my way, is usually a source of joy that you're letting me do certain things. Again, doing things, getting things done versus dreaming. Desktop first or mobile first, I think people first is the right answer to it, really, kind of. So whichever way, wherever they are. If you remember, many of you might remember, at one point, Flipkart wanted to close down its website. They got Myntra to close it down. I remember having a very long argument with Sachin Bansal on and the example I had was a train in Japan which runs only for one passenger. It runs day in, day out, and I think the argument was, hey, it's Flipkart, there's so much money. You can afford to run this. I mean, it's not that money is an issue. What is it, kind of? Because we have to be where users are. It's not either of them, it's user first. So the question really is, I have zero answer to this, and I don't know, but I'm just provoking, is what does deep personalization mean for spaces at scale, kind of, really? And very interestingly, of course, a lot of green is coming in, a lot of the outside is in, a lot of color is also in. But what is happening on the other two images? By the way, all of these are kind of partly or fully AI generated. A lot of offices don't want you to have personal spaces. They want you to leave the desk completely clean. It's clinical and clean, and suddenly that whole personalization disappears. That sense of ownership and belonging which you talked about, that disappears. The other thing is of course, not all home offices are like that, but everyone in the home office space aspires to be that. That's in space of their own, deeply personalized. There is the thing about people not wanting to come to work, especially when it's Bangalore and you're spending 3 hours to commute one way or whatever. So I think all of these are also problems. And how do you make an office space a place to come together and to belong? So the question really is, very often I've heard people talk in terms of efficiency scale, repeatability, cost, or we can do this. The question, and I have zero answer on this one, is how do we replace the or with the and, really, kind of? Can we have this and can we have that? Good so far? Yeah. Timing-wise? Okay. So the last and not the least is sometimes you create a space or create a place which exists only in time. Once it's done, it breaks apart and becomes completely afresh. And I've been doing this conference now for many years, and I'll just call DesignUp. And when in 2016, we kind of started pretty much like WiREnet, over a conversation in Kormangla saying, essentially me complaining, saying that I hate this conferences, design conferences are bad, and why don't people do, and all of that. And then it struck me, like a guru of mine used to say that, if you're complaining all of that, what are you going to do about him? He was from Chennai, but he was in Ahmedabad, and he had picked up some Hindi to say, tu kya karega? And that struck me, what is going to be my response? My response cannot be complaints and more complaints. My response has to be something that I would love to enjoy and sit and go to. So that is how DesignUp was born in 2016. We had a tiny space, and this space was, this is actually Naresh Venkatramanan's space in, what's that place? Church Street, yeah. So this was the ground floor, on the other side is social. This is a very narrow thing where 230 people were supposed to go, and this is a mezzanine space on the 6th floor, and the lift could only take about 6 people at a time. And this was a maths problem, not just a design problem. So how would people go up? So I think we put our design thinking hats on and said, guys, please come in very, very early. There are great breakfast places. Koshi's was around the corner, so we talked about Koshi's and other breakfast places. We kind of dangled the carrot of easy parking nearby. So we had a long campaign of emails going on for over 10 days. 10 days to go, 9 days to go. Here's one reminder. And if you are still late, we will have a refreshment set up at the 3rd floor, where you can get bananas and biscuits and yoga bars and tea and coffee. So just walk up, get your exercise, have your stuff, and go up. And we managed to avoid the lift problem, the maths problem, kind of. We managed to avoid. People were okay, because it was a very narrow space when I think back of it. Now, of course, this is the space. It was what it was. Our very first speaker was a woman. Our last speaker also was a woman in that thing. What we have done is, we have always said 2 or 3 principles which are very kind of sacrosanct, is that we will be always accessible, or accessibility, disability friendly, whichever way you put it. We will always have at least 4 to 5 speakers out of 10 have to be women, and we will have no disposable plastics. And so no disposable plastic water bottles. If you find anything, we'll have to find kind of the space owners kind of thing. So DesignUp grew 2016, 17, 18, 19. We just kept doubling. It was like the hockey stick growth of so we had, in 2019, we had 1,600 people attend. We took entirely Lalit Ashok over. We had people coming from Japan doing 40 feet interactive screens where you could interact with them. And so it was a celebration of technology and human ingenuity. And we said, okay, 2020 is going to be bigger and grander. And what happened was, boom, it was 0. So COVID hit, and it was something which was unimaginable for all of us. And 2021 was even worse, and I think many of you remember that. So in 2021, we did something very different. We did a conference online, and every ticket, 100% went to one of the 4 charities, which is, if you remember, there was oxygen sort of supplies was one. We actually funded a wing for a tribal hospital, because the fear was it might go to the tribal areas as well. So, and we raised about 70 lakhs for charities. And everyone around the world, we had speakers from all over different time zones coming in, even including Oscar winners and all sorts of awardees and everyone else. So 2024, we came together again, and this is the empty space. 1,000 chairs laid out before you. We said, okay. So we put some more ground rules. We said we don't want to have the biggest conference ever, and I'll come back to that. This is what it looks like on a Saturday afternoon, 1,000 people sitting and listening. Okay, not 1,000, maybe 950 or something. There are some empty chairs. It's a sense of, I think many of you have spoken about that, the sense of belonging. I belong to this place. This is my place. And part of that belonging is, of course, to say, what will we not have? Because the moment you make it a 2,000, 3,000 people conference, you will open the doors and you will have a lot more people who will not give you that sense of belonging. You might have people coming up to you and trying to sell you some .com sort of thing or some random things, and this is not what you want. We have been super selective about our sponsors. We actually rejected 2 sponsors this year, saying this is not in the spirit of what we want. So we said this is what we cap it at, 1,000, and that's it. No more anymore, kind of. I'll just play a snippet. That because I think running out of time. But if you look at that, this ramp is almost a 65-foot ramp. And it's built for 1 person. And this is what I was talking about earlier, building around 1, building for 1, even if we had to. We have no idea what it costs, and we don't even want to look at what it costs. If it needs to be done, it needs to be done. There is 1 human who needs it kind of thing. So this is that sense of tribal belonging, which is again what you guys are also doing here, which is we all belong to this larger tribe, and that's what makes people happy, coming together. We have people coming from hundreds of different companies, designers, including a lot of non-designers actually who come in, and from all over the world. So we have had people from even Myanmar and Mexico coming in. The interesting part is that what we did this year, which resonated so strongly with a lot of people, is we had a wall of names, where we put up the names of every company and every person who came here. And you can see someone out there that, when you see that you are also someone, and you're not just lost in a crowd of 1 million people, that's what makes you kind of smile and kind of feel happy. And I think this probably is the largest set of photographs that we have ever had, kind of with everyone saying, this is my name, this is me, I was there. There's Abhishu Roy kind of framing his name. There is Tanvi there framing her name. And I think people love that so much that we eventually had to put a wall of love, which collates all. We had when we look back, we probably had a cumulative 1 million different sort of impressions in different things. So we put this together as a wall of love and put that there. But so I think success is not really, and this is the word that I've been hearing also, it's about belonging. It's about longing to belong to something, longing to come back. People sending their cat photographs and all sorts of photographs saying, hey, damn, we're missing it. When are you coming back again? So it's not about the numbers. It's about that sense of belonging. So if I think about it, if I sum it up, there are these 4 stories and 4 learnings. Hopefully there's something there. The kitchens to UX, the airport, MakeMyTrip, and DesignUp. There are probably going to be a word with each of them: context, ownership, personalization, and belonging. I think the last 3 are all dependent upon the first one. If you understand the context of use, if you understand the context of your users, if you understand that, that space, that Sheraton was a beautiful space, but people are going to just come in together for 3 days, and they're going to change the energy of that space. They're going to bring, who are these people? What energy are they going to bring? What is the passion? What is the purpose? And 3 days, that event will happen. The place will be transformed and again go back to a default state overall. So if I look back at those words, I'll just put it there. That's probably a whole bunch of thoughts and ideas around what could spark joy. Not forever, but in little bits and pieces, to just remember and long for it again and again. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay, for that session. A wonderful wonderful session. I invite Fancy, George, and Smiti Sud to share a small token of appreciation to Jay. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, everybody. So it's been a true pleasure hosting you all tonight.